A part-time job is often a young person's first taste of independence, and one entry point into adult responsibilities. It can be more fun if it's a job worked alongside a friend, someone to talk to, joke with, and share the time and responsibilities with in a way that makes the hours go by just a little faster. In 1993, Seann Campbell and Bryan Benson were two such co-workers. They were both 20 years old, and both were part-time clerks at West Coast Video, a video rental store located in the Rosemore Shopping Center in Warminster, Pennsylvania. No one thinks that a part-time job worked with a friend will end in tragedy, but for Seann and Bryan it did. Both young men were brutally murdered the evening of November 10, 1993, just as they were closing up the video store for the night. Almost 30 years later, there have been no answers as to who murdered these two bright, promising young men. Bryan G. Benson was born in April 1973 to Janice and Gary Benson. He was the middle child of 3 boys and was an easygoing peacemaker between his 2 brothers, Andy and Eric. As he grew into a young man and attained more independence, he was still responsible. His mother said that Bryan didn't stay out late without calling home to let her know. He was an independent-minded person who, quote, marched to his own drum, unquote, having interest in music, sports, art, and movies. Bryan enjoyed decorating his bedroom with posters from his favorite movies, favorite bands, or just funny images that made you laugh, including a poster of the infamous "Expose Yourself to Art" photograph. Seann J. Campbell was born on January 29, 1973. His birth was followed 8 years later by a sister, Lane. At some point, his mother Bonnie married Greg Youngers, who would become Seann's stepfather. Greg seems to have had a close and caring relationship with his stepson, having helped Seann build his own bedroom at one point. Like many young people, Seann was someone who had an interest in multiple topics, and at age 20 didn't have a completely solid grasp on what field he planned to go into as a lifelong career. Architectural engineering was an interest, but so was law enforcement. He collected books on the latter topic, and according to Bonnie Youngers, quote, he was interested in issues of juvenile justice and deterrence. I really think law enforcement was where he eventually would have headed, unquote. Both young men came from stable backgrounds, and both still lived with their parents. Both would end up working for their local West Coast Video, which at the time was a video rental store franchise that had stores all over the USA. Seann had worked part-time at the West Coast Video store since he was in his early teens. A hard worker, he also held down a full-time job at Sylvan Pools. Bryan also worked part-time at the video store, but was a recent hire compared to his friend. He also attended Bucks County Community College, where he studied film. The fateful night of November 10, 1993 seemed uneventful at first. Bryan arrived around 5 p.m. for what he thought was a scheduled shift, only for his manager to tell him that he wasn't on the schedule. The manager asked if Bryan could stay, however, to which Bryan agreed. Seann was also working at the store. Around 9 p.m., Bryan's father Gary stopped by to check out some videos. Seeing that nothing was amiss, he concluded his business at West Coast Video and didn't hang around. Sometime around 10 p.m., the young men started to close up the store, but were attacked in the secluded adult video section of the store. Whether they were herded there by an attacker or a group of attackers, or were ambushed by assailants who had been hiding in the adult video section before closing, is impossible to determine. The number of assailants is also unknown, but police believe there were more than one. Bryan and Seann were both strong, fit young men, and Bryan suffered defensive lacerations to his arms. A fierce struggle for life ensued. The attackers stabbed Bryan and Seann with long knives, inflicting deep wounds on their necks and chests, but one of the victims managed to rip out an attacker's earring, leaving the gold stud with its fake diamond behind on the floor, flecked with blood and tissue. Despite Seann and Bryan's fight for life, they were overwhelmed. Their attacker or attackers left them to die, and their lifeless bodies were found the following morning by their manager, who had arrived to open the store. Fear laid heavy on the community of Warminster, as everyone trapped in the epicenter of the violence struggled to find answers. Answers that proved elusive. Individuals and businesses alike placed $52,000 into a reward fund, promised to anyone who gave information leading to an arrest for the killings. Robbery was considered as a potential motive. $300 had been taken from the register, but more money had been left behind, and neither Seann nor Bryan's wallets had been touched. The wire to the security camera had been cut, but the camera wouldn't have been on during the attack anyway. It only turned on when the store was closed. Was it a crime of revenge rather than a botched robbery? Did one or both of the victims have an enemy, perhaps a person that they knew nothing about? Police interviewed more than 300 people, including 75 people who had rented or returned videos during the roughly 5-hour period that the young men were on duty at the store, and came up empty-handed. Physical clues were equally difficult to uncover. The blood-flecked earring yielded DNA samples, but no match was found. A discarded rusted knife was found behind the Rosemore shopping center, but no usable evidence was found to tie it to the killings. Cruelest of all, perhaps, was a 1995 jailhouse confession that turned out to be a hoax. A prisoner named John Hall contacted the Campbell family by phone, claiming that another inmate had confessed to him that he had killed the 2 young clerks. However, Hall was lying. Now, as then, there are no answers as to what person or persons committed this heinous crime, or why. The loss of a loved one creates a void in a community, in a family, in the heart of each person who knew and cherished them. Warminster collectively mourned the loss of 2 bright, kind, promising young men who seemed to have had only potential and promise in their futures. Blue ribbons sprang up around trees and posts like flowers in spring, commemorating the young men, saying as a community, "We remember." But as the years passed and evidence became frustratingly hard to find, the ribbons vanished. The families would cope with a very personal loss that would never fully heal or go away. Instead, the loss was a never-ending cycle, each anniversary occurring with not even the prospect of justice for the loss of Seann and Bryan. Children would be born into the 2 families who would never know Seann or Bryan firsthand. Closure for such a loss is an impossibility. Speaking in 2013 near the 20th anniversary of the slayings, Bonnie Youngers, mother of Seann Campbell, said, quote, "If I never find out who did it, that is okay, because God knows who did it. Closure is when I put the lid down on the casket. That is the only closure I'll get until I die." Janice Benson felt similarly in 2013 about the idea of closure. Quote, "The hurt and pain will always be there. There is no closure. I hate that word. You don't close your son getting murdered." Unquote. Matthew Weintraub, chief of prosecution in the Bucks County DA office, was more hopeful that justice could be found for Seann and Bryan. Speaking in 2013 about the investigation, he said, quote, "This case is personal for us. We are just as anxious to find Seann and Bryan's killers today as we were 20 years ago. I really believe we'll solve this, but we need a lucky break." Unquote. If you have any information about the murders of Seann Campbell and Bryan Benson, contact the Warminster Police Department at 215-443-5000. Thank you for listening to this video. Again, if you have any information about this case, please contact the number shown on the screen.
Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back. Today, we will begin a new investigative series that we are titling Getting Away with Murder. Sadly, there are an incredible amount of unsolved murders that take place across the United States and, honestly, across the entire world. This case in particular, I chose to begin with because it happened less than a mile from my home. What can I tell you about where I live? Warminster, Pennsylvania is a quiet, small town, a suburb away from the hustle and bustle of Philadelphia. And it's interesting that this is the land of golf courses and good living. Warminster is known to be a place that people escape the city to. It's an affluent area with incredibly good schools and, by and large, good people. So, how then can a tragedy like this happen here? Murders are very infrequent in the town of Warminster, Pennsylvania. But even more strange was the brutality of this attack. These men were not just shot and killed, they were brutally, viciously stabbed to death with a long knife or knives. Both men fought for their lives. Both men lost that battle. For almost 30 years now, local officials have been hopeful that the case would be solved. I do want to mention that someone asked who the narrator's voice was in the piece we began our broadcast with. It belongs to a YouTuber, and in the description of the video is a link to that video. I found that while researching this case. It was excellent work. We've included it here in the spirit of fair use. Please do support good content creators. This person told the story much better than I could have in some ways, so we've included it here. I mentioned that this case happened probably about 1 mile from my house in a shopping center I frequent and visit almost every week. It's sort of your typical suburban strip mall with a pizza place, a bookstore, a supermarket, and at one time, a West Coast video store. Some interesting points to note about this case is that for almost 30 years now, there has been an incredible amount of hope that the case, though cold, would still be solved through the miracles of DNA. Every news report, every newspaper article, every local television report on this case all mention this earring. This earring is an incredibly important part of this story, as we will show you tonight. For 30 years, almost, for decades, local neighbors, police, and the district attorney believed that the case was solvable because of this earring, which was said to contain both blood and tissue. And you, if you research this case, will find almost every one who writes about this case or does this story talks about that earring being ripped from the perpetrator. How incredibly tantalizing to know that you, if you're the police or authorities, literally may have a piece of the attacker in your possession. And as I begun to dig into this case, I wondered, how could there have not been a match for decades, all of this time? Was there a match? What steps were the Warminster Police Department and the Warminster District Attorney taking? We've all heard about the incredible new science being used to solve cold cases. People call it different things. I would call it genealogical DNA matching. In the very famous, most famous case of this method working, the Golden State Killer, a man who had gotten away with murder for decades, was finally caught. Some may be unfamiliar with how that happened or what this method is. What happens in some cases, and happened in the Golden State Killer case, is that they submitted DNA from murder victims who had been raped and murdered. They had DNA from many different cases in the Golden State Killer case. So they used genealogical databases. They submit the sample, and they may not get the perpetrator, but according to statistics, in 90+% of the time, they will get a close familial match. What does that mean? That means you may not get the perpetrator of the crime through this method, but you will get a brother, a mother, a cousin. And in the case of the Golden State Killer, they did get a familial match, a match to a family member who had submitted their DNA to this database. So, investigators did a full genealogical study of the familial match in the Golden State Killer case. They were able to find a family member and then study that person's family tree to find a suspect that fit their criteria, who would be around the same age, who lived in the area of the killings at the time. And incredibly, the case was solved with this method. Upon hearing and reading so many articles mentioning that this specific case had great DNA evidence in the form of blood and tissue, skin and blood, surely, I thought, the authorities could get a DNA match from that material. I started digging into the case and was instantly stopped in my tracks, and we'll get into that. I began our investigation by reaching out to the Warminster District Attorney, who I had heard give a recent interview. I'm going to read you and show you one article which also mentions this DNA evidence. Again, this is fair use. We are educating the public. And this is from medium.com, an article by Nicole Henley, The Unsolved West Coast Video Store Murders. 2 co-workers, best friends, were murdered in a cold case. Only one clue, not a single answer. Most cold cases have at least a slim chance of being solved due to having a source of DNA evidence to match, or the murder weapon found. However, the possibilities for a particular cold case to get solved get that much harder when there is no known motive, no persons of interest or suspects named, or murder weapon discovered. What if the only key to closing the case was a tiny piece of DNA evidence, of which a match has yet to be established? Remember, this earring in this case is incredibly important, and we'll see more about why. That's the current reality for one particular cold case involving the double murders of 2 best friends and co-workers in 1993 at their place of work, a video store. This case, the West Coast Video Store Murders, hopefully will one day get the closure it deserves. Seann Campbell and Bryan Benson were best friends who grew up together in Warminster, Pennsylvania. In 1993, both were 20 years old and worked part-time at their local West Coast video store in the Rosemore Shopping Center on County Line Road. That is the shopping center I mentioned, friends, that is so close to my home. However, both men would meet an unfortunate, abrupt end one fateful night that to this day, no one knows who is responsible for or why it happened at all. Neither Seann or Bryan had kept any secrets from their loved ones. Both of them attended the same high school and shared mutual friends. Each lived with their respective parents within walking distance from the video store. At the time of their murders, Bryan was attending Bucks County Community College in addition to his part-time job at the video store, and Seann also worked full-time at Sylvan's Pools in Abington. Moreover, Seann had been working for the video store for up to 6 years by that point, while Bryan, sadly, had only begun working there 6 months earlier. The fateful night, within their last few hours, Seann and Bryan tended to several customers, including Bryan's father, Gary, who had stopped by the store around 9 p.m. to pick up some movies. By his account, nothing appeared out of the ordinary, and there was no reason for him to stay longer than he did, according to his wife. On the night of November 10th, 1993, both Seann and Bryan were in the process of closing up the store for the night. Shortly before 10 p.m., both entered the adult X-rated room, where they both got fatally stabbed with long-bladed knives into their necks, backs, and chests. Since both Seann and Bryan were at least 6 feet tall and physically fit, investigators firmly believe that there was more than one assailant, with the notion that there had been two. Despite being stabbed repeatedly, both put up a good fight, as evidenced by defensive wounds on each of their forearms during the autopsies. Though the motive was initially suggested to be robbery, the fact that the assailant or assailants took only $300, not including any cash in the register or either of the victims' wallets, has cast doubt on this. Moreover, police suggested that either the assailants hid in the adult X-rated room of the store before attacking them, or that both men were lured there by some form of force. It is unclear which one of these two scenarios did occur. Unfortunately, no one discovered their bodies until the owner of the store did the next morning, which by then was too late. Police at the scene found neither any signs of forced entry or a murder weapon. Additionally, they discovered that the front door had been left both unlocked and ajar. Furthermore, detectives discovered, and here's the important part, that someone had cut the wire to a security camera aimed at the cash register. I think that's an important clue. How would they know the wire was there? Even more frustratingly, investigators quickly determined that cutting the cord of the security camera would have made little difference at all, since the security camera was not working at the time. The security cameras did not activate until the store was locked. And then we move on to the investigation. Though the police concluded that two assailants responsible, trying to identify them proved challenging. Interestingly, the one clue they did find was a gold half-inch. Here is the most important part. The important clue that they found was a gold half-inch fake diamond stud earring, which they found on the floor between the bodies. This earring was found on the floor between the bodies. And this article, like many, state information from the police that says it had been ripped off during the ensuing fight between one of the boys and their assailants. Subsequently, DNA was collected from the earring in the form of tissue and blood. However, despite the DNA obtained from the stud, any matches from it have yet to be found. Yeah, and there was the jailhouse snitch, which lied and said that he knew who the assailant was. And, you know, the case just gets sadder. It becomes a cold case. Never did they get a match to the DNA. But we will hear more about the DNA and this very important evidence, this earring, that for years, all news reports that covered this story said was ripped from the assailant and found between the two discovered bodies and contained blood and tissue. The sad part is, of course, their surviving relatives. They are no longer confident that the murders of their respected loved ones will ever get solved. and at least somewhat made peace with that. Despite that, both families still deserve some, or at least some, answers. Hopefully, Seann and Bryan both get justice one day soon. If anyone out there knows even the tiniest, seemingly insignificant clue to who killed Seann and Bryan and why, please contact the number below, and that would be the Warminster Police Department at 215-443-5000. Now, I have repeatedly mentioned this earring as being so important. Why? Well, I was so interested in this case because they have DNA evidence. They've got blood. They've got tissue. Certainly, they should be able to use this new method, genealogical familial DNA matching, with a database. And by the way, that has proven effective in many, many different cold cases so far. Most famously, the Golden State Killer case, which was a case that most people involved with thought it's never going to be solved. For years, they were unable to get a match. Now, for those unaware, there's something called CODIS, which is a DNA database. And many states in the United States, when someone is convicted of a felony crime, they will swab them and they will submit their DNA to the CODIS database. So now I have to make assumptions here, and we'll get into why I have to assume things soon. I'm assuming that they submitted the DNA to CODIS, which is the criminal federal government database of criminals, and never received a match. That would seem to point to the fact that this assailant, who was the owner of the earring ripped from him during the attack, the murder, was never convicted of other crimes, or he would likely, at least serious crimes, or he or she would likely be in this database that all law enforcement agencies use. I've mentioned this earring and DNA evidence, and as I said, every single article up to a point, let me check here. What was that? The article that we just referenced was from 2018. I found articles from 2020 that also mentioned this earring, the DNA evidence, and that the earring was ripped from the ear of one of the murderers. So to me, it's so tantalizing that for all of this time, investigators appear to have the key to solving this double murder, and so far have been unable to do that. When I realized that the Golden State Killer case was solved using these genealogical databases, the first question that I had for authorities was, did you submit this to genealogical databases to get a familial match? If you can't get a match through CODIS, perhaps you could at least get a match to one of these assailants' family members and then work the investigation from there. I think, or I did think, that this case, having this DNA evidence, is still very, very solvable. And I just want to mention that I am the father of two boys. And when I think about the horror of losing one of them, it's unbearable to me, especially to a violent act like a brutal murder. But worse than that, I thought about the families who for almost 30 years now have been waiting for justice for the loss of their sons. There's two grieving families, and not to mention, remember being 20 years old. I bet when you were 20 years old, you had a lot more friends than you do now. These two men were grieved by many people, including the whole town, even people who didn't know them. still whisper about this case and wonder why it was never solved if the police have DNA evidence linked directly to one of the killers. Now, here's where things get interesting. In researching this case, I started to go through all the news reports. And as I said, every news report that you find on this case mentions the earring ripped from the probable murderer's ear during the murder. Until recently, because, and here's where all of my questions really begin about this case, and where this case takes on a frightening new dimension of mystery. Recently, the local district attorney, his name is Matt Weintraub, gave an interview to a local television station. And during that interview, remember, for all of this time now, every news article you find, every report, everything mentions this earring. They have the DNA. We're still hopeful we'll get a match. We're still hopeful that the case could be solved because we have this smoking gun evidence ripped from one of the murderer's ears. And then all of that changed. All that changed during a recent interview. And one second, I'm got to get the, I have to get the date of that interview. I don't want to misspeak here. One second. This was last year sometime, though. And the district attorney gives an interesting interview. And during this interview, he says that the earring has been ruled out as being relevant to the case. And I couldn't believe it. Like, how was that determined? The earring is no longer relevant. You guys figured out that that had nothing to do with the case. And this brings up a startling amount of questions. And my first question to the district attorney and the local police were, how often do you find a bloody earring with skin still on it between two murder victims at the scene of a crime that's unsolved, that is not relevant to the case? So my troubling questions about this case began right here with this new interview. And we are going to cite fair use. This is a local news station, local to me. This is a transformative work. We're educating the public, and we will be discussing and critiquing the video that we're sharing. For those just joining us, you're watching Truth Seekers, and you are here at the debut of our new series, Getting Away with Murder. So far, what we can tell you is that for almost 30 years, there has been the myth of this case. It's going to be solved. And the reason it's going to be solved is because the police have a bloody earring that even had skin on it that was ripped from the ear of one of the murderers during the attack. But recently, the Warminster district attorney gave an interview, and I was struck by the lack of explanation, because everyone, I know it's hard to tell, you don't live here in my town in Warminster, Pennsylvania, but everyone that I asked about this case, remember, I'm a recent resident here. I was born and raised and lived most of my life in Philadelphia before moving here a few years ago. But everyone I asked about this case, I went to the original shopping center. I'm going to go back tomorrow or the next day because there are some people that are just busy at work and didn't have time to talk to me who promised they would. Everyone that I talked to said, yeah, it's a shame they never solved that, especially because they have that DNA evidence. Everyone I talked to said, yeah, they got that earring that was ripped right out of the murderer. I don't know why they never solved the case. Why didn't they ever get a match? And the interesting part is nobody knows if they ever did get a match. And now we get this interview with the local district attorney where he just says, this earring thing took on mythic proportions, but we've been able to rule it out as being relevant to the case. But then he offers no explanation as to, number one, how was that earring that had blood and tissue all over it found at this in between two dead bodies determined to not be relevant to the case? And what steps were taken? How did they determine it's not relevant to the case? Did they get a match and then they interview the person it matched to and then exclude them from being involved with the murder? We'll get into my questions, but the important part is that the Warminster District Attorney's Office and the Warminster Police Department have so far refused to answer a single question that I asked. They even employ at the district attorney's office a full-time communications director whose job it is to communicate with members of the media. And here's where things get even stranger. They have communicated with many different members of the media, and we can see evidence of that by all the newspaper articles, all the local television news stories about it. They have communicated in the past, but apparently they will no longer communicate anything about this case. And we are going to see more about that. But let's listen to this recent news report. And again, this is from, one second. This is from April 22nd. So for this entire time now, from 1996, from November 10th, 1996, up until this date, April 22nd, 2022, every news report talked about this earring and how they extracted DNA and how it was ripped from the assailant's ear. And suddenly now that earring has been determined by the Warminster District Attorney's Office to not be relevant to the case, even though it was an earring with blood and tissue on it that was found sitting between two discovered dead bodies in this case. And let me be very clear. Those men were not dead bodies. Those men were important. Their names were Seann Campbell and Bryan Benson, and they matter. And the community deserves answers about this sudden change, and also about why it took 30 years almost to determine suddenly that that evidence was not relevant anymore. And somebody really needs to explain to me how you find a bloody earring with skin on it between two dead bodies, and it's just not relevant to the case. And the fact that they won't answer questions really bothers me. But let's get into the news report, friends. This is fair use. We'll critique the video and talk about it after the video plays, courtesy of local news station.
Two families searching for answers. Nearly 30 years ago, Bryan Benson and Seann Campbell were fatally stabbed while finishing their shifts at a Warminster video rental store. Bucks County authorities have had few leads, but the case remains a priority. Here's Joe Holden.
It was closing time at the West Coast Video in the Rosemore Shopping Center in Warminster. Both Seann Campbell and Bryan Benson were on the clock. The two 20-year-olds were wrapping things up when they were brutally attacked.
It's a terrible case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
It was November 10th, 1993. The men were repeatedly and savagely stabbed.
The double murder investigation has remained open and on the books here in Bucks County. Detectives and prosecutors are hopeful someday they will catch a break. This is a case that has haunted your office.
It has. It's haunted my office. It's haunted me personally because I was a brand new ADA when these two young men got murdered. And not only that, they grew up in the town that I grew up next door in. We went to the same high school. We were only a few years apart from each other. So this really resonated with me and has stuck with me now for 3 decades.
The case, deeply personal for those in the highest reaches of law enforcement in the county, roiled the quiet Warminster community. Both Seann and Bryan were well liked. A lead theory, this deadly crime was a robbery gone bad. District Attorney Matt Weintraub says some early theories turned out to be incorrect, including the discovery of an earring that was early on suspected to be the killer's. Weintraub says that wasn't so.
We did locate an earring at the scene of these two murders, and that has taken on this mythological proportions in the eyes of the public. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we've been able to diffuse that myth, at least professionally, in that earring is not connected to the killers. I wish that it were, because it might lead us to somebody.
Last year, CBS 3 spoke with Bryan Benson's mother, Janice, after the families donated unused reward money to charity.
No matter what, there would never be any closure. Yeah. You don't close something like that.
Even with the passage of time, it is hoped a killer will be found. The case remains open and very active.
It would give me not only great professional satisfaction, but a lot of personal satisfaction if I could bring these two young men's killers to justice.
For CBS 3 Mysteries, this is Joe Holden.
So there we have it, friends. A stunning admission by the district attorney that the earring is not relevant to the case. And this just leaves me filled with questions. So you guys know how I am. I dig into something. I investigate it as fully as humanly possible. So I went to the district attorney's communications director and started asking questions. And very quickly, let's call it a relationship, I don't know. Very quickly, I called him on the phone and talked to him on the phone first. I had some questions and I requested an interview with the district attorney and was told that that would be possible, but he's very busy. I'll get back to you, or something to that effect. Then I called the communications director back and I said, I'd like to fully investigate this. I'm a good investigator and I'd like to see everything that you have on the case. Well, that's when the everything did a 180. And the communications director then told me the district attorney denied my request for an interview about the case. And further, if I wanted to see anything related to this nearly 30-year-old cold case, I would have to file what is called a right to know request, which is the local equivalent. Many of you people are familiar with FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act. It's very similar, and it applies to government agencies. Anyone as a citizen can fill out a right to know request and request to see anything, phone records, whatever. So I did exactly that at the direction of the Warminster County District Attorney's communications officer, who said, I can't give you any records. You have to fill out right to know requests for whatever you want. And then I believe I talked to him on the phone and I said, well, I want to see everything. I want to see the DNA results. I want to see what labs you sent it to. I want to see how did you determine that that is not relevant. I want to see the investigative reports. I want the names of the officers who originally investigated this case. I want to see I want the names of the officers who are currently investigating the case. In short, I want everything. I want to see it all. And that's where things took a turn here. And so I am going to show you my original right to know request. 1 second here. Let me get this. And I've gotten quite an education. And what I can tell you in Pennsylvania about the right to know laws is they should not call it a right to know law. They should call it a right to know whatever we decide you're going to know law. So I will show you my original request. I'm going to share my screen here. 1 second, friends. And so I began to submit right to know requests. And I have been submitting right to know requests since this began several weeks ago. And things get stranger and stranger the deeper that we begin to investigate this nearly 30-year-old cold case. I said, hello, someone from your office told me I should contact you. I'm an investigative journalist, and I'm investigating the unsolved murders of Seann Campbell and Bryan Benson. I realize this is a very old case, but I am looking for all the files and materials you have on the case, past or present. I would like any and all files, emails to or from your office concerning the case, meeting minutes, media files, audio recordings. I try to paint with a very broad brush here to just let them know I want to see all of it. I want everything you have. Audio recordings, investigators' notes or reports, video recordings, etc. I am also specifically interested in emails between the district attorney's office and any and all police officers involved in a case, past or present, and email communications, past or present. This line here about being specifically interested in the emails between the district attorney's office and any and all police officers involved in the case was advice given to me by a retired police officer's friend. He looked at what I had been looking into so far, and we had a phone conversation, and he gave me the advice that if I want to get up to speed on what's really been going on with the case, I want to see the emails that they're shooting back and forth about what's going on with the case. So I put that line specifically in there, thanks to a retired police officer friend who's an excellent detective, and by the way, has offered to, for free, to investigate this case with me. And besides him, I have several other retired police officers who are offering to help me investigate this case fully. I go on to say, I would like your office to conduct a thorough search and provide me with everything you have. I am local to you in Warminster, and I would be happy to come to your office and pick up copies of everything if that makes it easier for you. Otherwise, email is fine. Emails or files scanned to PDF can be sent back to this email address. Please let us know if you need me to fill out a form or forms, or what other requirements you currently have. And please let me know you got this message and when I can expect this request to be fulfilled. Thanks in advance for your help and assistance, Seann Campbell, investigative journalist. And of course, they label that as an exhibit, letting, this all becomes public record. The fact that it becomes public record is both good and bad. It's bad because you have to be very careful what you say in these requests, because it will become public record. But the good news is that we will generate a paper trail that anyone else will be able to see what this district attorney's office is doing. And I believe that what they're doing is completely improper. And so here is the response to my right to know request. Dear Seann Campbell, your request for information was received by the Bucks County District Attorney's Office via email. By this request, you seek the following. They detail what I asked for, which is essentially everything. Then they tell me your request is denied. And they give a lot of legal reasons for why. If possessed, the contents of the district attorney's file of investigative materials, whether they exist in paper or electronic form, including any police investigative reports, scientific reports, testing results, crime scene photographs that may exist, witness photographs, and video audio recordings, are not public record and are exempt from disclosure under our right to know law. And they cite the law. Specifically, are prohibited from disclosure to you under Criminal History Record Information Act. And this is where it gets problematic, because they're citing a law that says we can't tell you anything. Yet they have told multiple media outlets all kinds of things in the 30-year history of the case. And I believe that this is improper. They cannot use the law to shield themselves and prevent disclosure of information, and at the same time ignore the very same law whenever they choose to their selected media friends. 2, if possessed, the contents of the district attorney's office files, witness and defendant statements, summaries or memoranda of statements, or anticipated testimony of all witnesses, photographs, video surveillance footage, body camera footage, communications or reports between the police and the DOA, evidence list, descriptions of physical evidence and or evidence disclosed in a hearing or provided to the criminal defendants, are not public record and are exempt from disclosure under right to know statute. And again, they list the same statute. and are so they list two statutes for why these files are exempt. They say it's also exempt from disclosure under this law. Specifically states investigative information shall not be disseminated to any department. Here's where I have a problem with this. So they're citing a law saying that individual requesting the information is a criminal. They cannot release any information unless you're a criminal justice agency. Yet they have released information to members of the media for the past 30 years. Suddenly, they don't want to release anything. They will not give me a single scrap of anything. And they are now refusing to answer any questions about this case. None. Not a question. They will not answer even basic questions about the case. This point 4 is not important. They tell me I can't have the original 911 recordings. I have to go to the Warminster Police for that. Then they say that these records are all protected and not subject to disclosure under work product privilege law. However, again, they're citing a law to say we don't have to disclose anything to you. It's work product privilege. However, again, they have released information both to victims' family members and members of the media for the entire 30-year history of the case whenever they chose to. It's just now that people start asking about this earring and the DNA evidence that suddenly they do not want to release anything. And again, point 6, I have to go to the Warminster Police Department to get certain items, which I am doing. Then they tell me I can appeal the denial of instant requests. And here's where it gets interesting. So the denying agency, the agency that says, no, you can't have any of this information, is the Warminster District Attorney's Office. Then they tell me I can file an appeal on this denial with another member of the District Attorney's Office. And I object to that. That makes no sense. So you're the denying agency saying we don't have to give you a single scrap of any information. We don't have to answer any of your questions, none. And you can appeal to another guy in our office. They say, they tell me what I need to. And this is from Timothy Lutz, Assistant District Attorney. And here's where things get interesting. So I thought I was dead in the water, but I kept thinking about the fact that they continually are releasing information in those files I'm asking for to members of the media. I talked to someone familiar with FOIA laws and right to know requests, a lawyer who told me he read their letter and he said, they can't have it both ways. And I said, so I'm right? They can't ignore the law and release information from those files whenever they choose to, and then use that same law to shield themselves from release of any information. And I also just want to give a shout out and thank you to John from the Black Vault, because from John from the Black Vault, for those who don't know who John is, he is the originator of the Black Vault website, and he files FOIA requests with the federal government constantly and forces them to release all kinds of information that they don't want to release. I reached out to John, but he didn't get back to me. He's a very busy guy. I asked him for advice. But the one thing I remembered about John is John saying, always file the appeal. Even if you think you're going to lose, even if you think you're on shaky ground, file the appeal. Let them know you want this information, you're entitled to this information, and you refuse to be denied information that they should be releasing. So I filed a right to know request appeal. And we are still waiting on the appeal. But I used the argument that they cannot. First of all, there's two arguments here that are relevant. And one of them is that they are using the law to shield themselves from releasing these documents while ignoring this very same law whenever they choose to at their own discretion. According to legal expert I consulted, they can't do both. It's one or the other. Now, if they could prove they've never released anything from those case files to anyone outside of law enforcement agencies, then sure, that would be a valid argument. But we can see in all these newspaper reports throughout the history of this case, which are substantial, there's a lot of newspaper articles, there's a lot of television news reports on a lot of the anniversary of the event. Somebody will do a local news story about it. Yeah, the case is still not solved. All includes information that could only have come from the district attorney's office or the Warminster police. So I don't want to bore you for too long here reading legal paperwork, but it's important that we show you some of this appeal. I cite the right to know. The objective of the right to know law is to empower citizens by affording them access to information concerning the activities of their government. And that's case law. Further, this important open government law is, quote, designed to promote access to official government information in order to prohibit secrets, scrutinize the actions of the public officials, and make the public officials accountable for their actions. And again, I cite case law. I go on to argue, how can we do the above effectively when the denying agency has failed to even properly evaluate all the records in their possession? Another of my arguments is that they gave me the deny letter like 2 days after I filed the right to know request. This is an almost 30-year-old case. There's no way they evaluated everything in their possession. And I don't believe that this broad brush denial is either appropriate in this case or legal. It is clear the denying agency here wishes to withhold literally every single thing in the case file. This is not appropriate in this instance, nor is it legal. Further, are we, the citizenry, supposed to just trust the denying government agency attempting to withhold information? Do we have no recourse when it is clear they failed to properly evaluate every bit of information in a nearly 26-year-old case file? I hereby request that the appeal officer research, fully audit, or evaluate all the records and materials in their possession of the district attorney's possession relevant to this case, itemize each item, and prove exemptions are appropriate. Now, some might say this is not a very good argument. They're not going to do that. But again, this becomes public record. I'm asking them, can you itemize everything in your possession? And the burden of proof is on the denying agency. They have to prove that everything that they're in possession of is exempt. And I hate to be sort of aggressive with this appeal, but I want to let them know that I'm not going away here. I'm not, you're not just going to say, sorry, we're keeping everything and you can't have any information. I cite more case law. And again, this case has been interesting to investigate because suddenly I have to turn into a lawyer and I had to find case law to cite to argue why they have to do an audit of all the materials in their possession. And apparently, according to the law, they have to. I cited this Pennsylvania law that says an appeals officer is required to review all information filed related to the request and may consider testimony, evidence, and documents that are reasonably probative and relevant to the matter at issue. An appeals officer may conduct a hearing to resolve an appeal. And here I say perhaps an on-the-record public hearing on these matters would be more appropriate, but that should only take place after the appeals officer has complied with our request. Again, I'm trying to push them. And I'm trying to make it really difficult for them to not give me some of this information. Comply with our request to properly evaluate, catalog, and show legal cause for each item in their possession they intend to withhold from this legal right to know request. Yeah. And again, I cite the case law that says this law is designed to promote access to official government information. I talk about how the time frame from request to denial, the denying agency did not actually go through all the materials. We can assume they didn't go through everything they have. Another argument I made here is that there is likely or has to be publicly available information in their possession. They had to have released press releases in the past 26 years since this case aired. They have to have some publicly available information in the case files. They can't just say, we put it in our case files, you can't see anything. They have to go through and make sure that every single thing in all of their possession, all of their case files, every single thing they have to go through it all. And they have to prove why it's exempt from right to know laws. So essentially, I'm attempting to make it very difficult for them to continue to deny me information. And let me see if there's some other parts that we'll read off to you here. And I also, again, trying to make it hard for them. I would like to formally request the Warminster District Attorney's research and release a catalog of what the case file contains and how they have determined and proved exemption for each item within the case file. If they cannot do this and prove they did so, proving exemptions for every item they possess, they have no choice but to comply with my legal request and release every item in their possession that they cannot clearly and definitively prove is exempt from Pennsylvania right-to-know laws. I cite case law that the district attorney's office is a local agency subject to the right-to-know law and is required to disclose public records. Records in possession of a local agency are presumed public unless exempt from right-to-know law or other law or protected by privilege, judicial order, or decree. Upon receipt of a request, an agency is required to assess whether a record requested is within its possession, custody, or control and respond within 5 business days. And here's where it gets important. This is more case law. An agency bears the burden of providing the applicability of any cited exemptions. Section 708 of the Right to Know law places a burden of proof on the public body to demonstrate that a record is exempt. And here's where it gets important. Let's say, for example, that they have yearbook photos of the 2 victims in the case file. Those are public records. Those are not exempt from right to know laws. And I'm arguing here that merely placing publicly available records into this case file does not automatically exempt it from disclosure, at least according to everything that I've researched under right to know laws. So what are we doing with this appeal? Number one, we're letting them know I'm not going away. I'm not going away. I'm going to keep harping on this. We want to know what's in these case files. We want to know why this case has not been solved in decades. We want to know what you're doing lately. And we'll get into that because this gets more interesting. It gets more interesting as we go. 1 second here. Let me get rid of this. I have a little more to share with you. But what I can tell you is that we have really hit a brick wall so far. And we argue the burden of proof is on the district attorney to prove records do not exist. They have failed to do so. The denying agency's reasons. So I concede a few points, which is, hey, if these things are exempt from disclosure, great, but you have to prove that every item is. And I end it with the questions that I want answered, which I was also told I have to submit every question I have in a formal right to know request or appeal. They will not answer any question over the phone, through email, or in person. They will answer nothing about this case. You're not allowed to ask even when's the last time an investigator spent, a few hours investigating this case. Won't answer any questions. And so I'm left with an awful lot of questions. I closed this appeals letter with saying, it is clear that no one in your office actually evaluated every item in your office is in possession of. It's clear you have not proven every item you possess qualifies for the exemptions you cited in your initial denial to release. Again, the placement of information into a police investigative report or into the district attorney's office files does not automatically exempt all of it from public release or right to know laws. I also wish to put on record that I believe the district attorney's office is refusing release of records because of serious questions in this case that their office so far refuses to answer. When was the DNA evidence in this case determined to be no longer relevant to the case? How was that determination made? By whom and by what methods? Was a genetic profile ever developed from the DNA evidence? Was a match ever found to the DNA? Do people often leave earrings with blood and tissue samples on them at the site of a double homicide that are not relevant to the homicide case? Why did it take 25 years to determine that the DNA evidence or earring found at the scene was not relevant to this double homicide? Was a DNA profile, if one was developed, or a DNA sample from that earring ever submitted to a genetic DNA database, such as the one used in the Golden State Killer case to find familial matches? The Warminster District Attorney's Office must now choose transparency or continue secrecy about this case. They must choose to do what is best for the public good, the victims and their families, or do what is best for them personally. I trust your office will reevaluate their earlier denial of my right to know request and make the right choice. Sincerely, me, investigative journalist. So it gets better. They have so far not replied to the appeal. And I thought that they were in violation of the law because 5 days had elapsed and they had not responded to the appeal. But apparently they have 30 days. And so if we check the date of, let me check the date. November 28th is the date of the appeal that I filed. And again, what we're building here is our own case file, our own paper trail, which anybody else will be able to access. I'm developing a website where we'll be sharing every scrap of information about this case publicly to the web for anyone to be able to participate with. Now things get better here. It gets a little crazy. So after the right to know requests, I go back to the communications guy at the Warminster District Attorney's Office. By the way, I'm a nice guy. I let him know that I appealed their denial. I sent him a copy of the denial in case he or the district attorney, wanted to read my appeal. I'm trying to give these people the benefit of the doubt. I'm trying to at least be friendly with them. They may have very good reasons. And I want to be very clear here in that I think by and large, I live here. The police here do a great job. The district attorney does a great job. This is the most crime-free place that I have ever lived in my entire life. Remember, I grew up in Philadelphia. Some would say in the mean streets of Philadelphia. I lived in some shady places where there was crackheads and drug dealers living next door to me and people knocking on my door at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to buy meth. They wanted the house next to me who sold the meth, So I have no problem with the local authorities here. I think they do an incredibly good job. And this is a very difficult case. Very little evidence. And, but I thought, rather naively, going into this, I thought I could do something here. Maybe I could develop some new leads. Maybe I could look at things a different way than other investigators with the police or the district attorney have looked at them. I have an uncanny ability to see through deception due to some of my experience. I'm excellent at uncovering things that people don't want to be uncovered. I'm excellent at finding hidden information that the people hiding that information would prefer stay hidden. I'm great at that. I was rather naive going into this, and I cannot tell you how disappointed I am with the results of my so-called investigation so far, because right now I am limited to whatever I can find on the internet or whatever local people will tell me. I've begun interviewing some people who were somewhat familiar with the case or the victims' families. I've got boards over here on the wall I'm going to be doing a victimology study on both of the victims. I want to know everything that I can about both those two men. That may help me to give me some clue as to who might have done this. Now let's talk about some elements of the case before we end with, or you know what, we'll go to this. I want to share with you some. All right, and like I said, here's where it gets interesting. So I go back to the director of communications at the district attorney's office after suddenly realizing that they are stonewalling. I mean, that's the only term I can use. They won't answer a single question. And they have answered questions in the past. So this is curious to me. Why won't they answer any questions about this case now? But they used to answer questions, and anybody in the media, newspaper writer, whoever, could call them up and they would answer questions. At least I'm assuming so, unless every newspaper writer and television media person, every member of the media has just been repeating the same old information for decades. No, there was quotes in some of them from the district attorney's office or somebody from the police. They were talking, and they would talk to members of the media recently about this case through its whole history until right now. And so I'm left with more questions than answers. And, you know, I don't know. Well, we have a game plan for why we do have a game plan. And I'm going to be developing that game plan and trying to make progress. And I have decided, a lot of you know this about me, I'm an all chips in kind of a guy, right? To use a poker analogy, I'm all chips in on this one. I'm going to do whatever I have to do to investigate this case. And if the Warminster District Attorney's Office, the Warminster Police Department don't want to be at all helpful, I'll do it on my own. I'll find out what I can on my own, and we'll move forward with as complete and thorough as an investigation of this case as I can reasonably provide without the cooperation of authorities. And that's unfortunate because we're going to have to retread all kinds of different avenues about this case that they've already explored and eliminated as possibilities, right? All right, so let's get into this communications director. And here's where things went south. I was initially told that I could get an interview by the communications director. He says, Mr. Cambion, the district attorney, is not taking part in any interview on this case. Oh, he's doing interviews, all right. You want to interview him about other stuff? You can get an interview. But he will not do interviews on this case. Then the communications director says, your other questions were addressed in the right to know request and appeal. And I said, no, some questions were asked in my right to know request, but no answers were provided by your office so far. I have asked you multiple times now for the names. Here's another important. I want the names of the investigative detectives from your office or the Warminster Police Department, past or present. Many of them may be retired. This is a decades-old case. There could be a detective out there right in my local area who studied this case for 10 or more years and was never able to solve it, but is a wealth of information about this case and what has been done so far. I want the name of that guy. I want to find him. I want to meet him. I want to talk to him. I want to interview him. I want to know everything I can about this case. They won't give me the names of the investigative detectives from their office or the Warminster Police Department. I said I tried to ask Warminster Police Department, but they never answered the phone. I have left several messages with no reply. And here's where it gets even interesting. I asked for copies of press releases. And their communications director, he says, I do not have any past news releases related to this case. Folks, press releases are a normal thing. There has to be some sort of press release within their office. They won't even give me public press releases that they have released in the past about this case. They say I may want to try the police department if they send out anything during the course of the investigation, and if they would have copies to release to you. And we're on that. We're filling, and again, we have to fill out right to know requests. Why? Because the local police department doesn't answer the phone or return any phone calls about this case, right? As far as the past and present detectives investigating this case, that should have been addressed in your right to know request. I ask him, I'm not trying to be difficult here, but for a communications director, you seem to have problems communicating. It is a very simple request. Please let me know if you can forward me copies of press release, and if not, why? And then again, he claims that he has none. It just gets worse and worse from here. We can't get an interview. It's bad. So then there is the matter of then the communications director essentially tells me, I'm not answering any questions. Our office is not answering any questions. You need to file a right to know request with any questions that you have, and then he cites some sort of law. There is no law that prevents a communications director, to my knowledge, of answering questions, maybe certain questions, but the fact that he won't answer any questions about this is very troubling. One more thing to share that is very important, and that is where I was told that I have to ask questions in right to know requests. And folks, usually this is not how this works. You don't fill out a right to know request because you have a question. You ask the communications director, whose job it is to interact with members of the media and answer questions. I say, Mr. Gamies, no, I didn't ask those questions about who the investigation detectives were in my right to know request. I asked you directly. Are you now telling me I need to fill out separate right to know requests to get you to answer a very simple and direct question? Who are the detectives handling the case currently? Who are the detectives who handled the case previously? Again, I have tried to call the Warminster Police Department, but their non-emergency number is always a voicemail or no answer. I have kept a detailed call log. Again, we're documenting everything. I have left several messages, no return calls. If you insist, I will send another right to know request. Right to know requests are usually for records, not simple questions that a public agency usually just answers, especially when they use taxpayer dollars. This is kind of a dig at him, I'll admit it. Especially when they use taxpayer dollars to employ a full-time communications director. At least that has been my experience with other cities or towns. Here, the communications director says, I would suggest you do that. In other words, I have to fill out a right to know request for every question I have. Under the Criminal History Records Information Act, we are prohibited from releasing most investigative information about this case. But again, they can ignore that law to select members of the media whenever they choose to, in this case's decades-long history. So again, they're using the law to shield them from having to disclose any information, while at the same time ignoring the very same law whenever they choose to. I can't just simply give you that information. Our right to know attorneys would have to review your request. So I did what he asked for, and now I am going to become quite the pain to this guy. All right, so I have filed 2 additional right to know requests. Do we see where this is going, friends? Do you think they're figuring out that I'm not going away? I'm not going away. All right. 1 second. Now would be a good time for redactions. 1 second. Let me figure out how to do this here. Okay, I got it. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I've been doxxed so many times, everybody has my phone number anyway, right? I get calls from some strange people sometimes. All right. All right. So I say I'm an investigative journalist. This is to This is to DA Right to Know, who is the man who denied our original Right to Know request. And here I am back. Recently, I asked your office's communications director some questions about the case. He has now indicated that I need to file Right to Know requests for questions I have. See Exhibit A attached. See how official I am? I gave him a screenshot copy of their communications director telling me I have to fill out Right to Know requests for every question. Your communications director has refused to answer many basic questions about the case and, as indicated, is now saying I should file Right to Know requests for my questions. So consider this my Right to Know request as he directed. I am forwarding you the questions he did not or claimed he could not answer, specific to the earring and DNA found in the initial investigation. And again, I'm establishing a paper trail. I asked these questions in my appeal to the original Right to Know request, but I'm filing a separate one and they're going to have to deal with it. Can you, in a recent interview, District Attorney Matthew D. Weintraub stated that the earring in this case was excluded from being relevant to the case. When was this determination made? Can you, I should have numbered these, but I did for the second request. Can you confirm or deny there was blood and tissue samples found on the earring originally in 1993? Was that blood or tissue used to extract DNA from? Was there a DNA match to someone who was then cleared? If so, who was the match? How was it determined that the earring and therefore the blood and tissue samples from the earring were not related to the case? When was that determination made? Can you provide a timeline of these events? If that determination was just made recently, why did it take almost 30 years to get to that determination? Yeah, to be very honest, I think that part of their refusal to answer these questions may have to do with the simple embarrassment. It should not have taken 20-something years to determine that DNA was not relevant to the case. And again, I'm still going to ask this very important question. How is an earring with blood and tissue on it left at the scene of a double homicide, but you, the authorities, say, well, it's not relevant? They need to answer the question then. How? How did you make the determination it's not relevant? I go on to ask, was a DNA profile ever extracted from the blood and tissue samples? Was that DNA profile submitted to CODIS or any other DNA database for matching? What were the results? Were the blood and tissue samples preserved? Are they available for further testing, matching, or genealogical DNA matching, as was shown to be effective in identifying the perpetrator in the Golden State Killer case? I will have different questions. I will try to categorize those and send them in different requests. Thank you in advance for your prompt attention to my request. So now there's going to be a paper trail of me asking these questions. And they're going to have to tell the public, we're not answering any of these questions. And I think that's going to be very problematic for them. I can't imagine, of course, the next step here, if they deny the appeal that I've already filed, and if they deny these Right to Know requests and refuse to answer these questions, the very next step is to file against them in common pleas court and argue there for release of this information and to get a judge to force them to release these records, to get a judge to force them to answer these questions. But I'm hesitant to do that. And not because of the difficulty in doing it. It is a difficult thing, filing all that legal paperwork. Yes, I'm willing to do it. But most of me thinks that the district attorney's office has a relationship with every judge in my area. They all know each other. It's a big club, and I ain't in it. They all play golf together at a golf course a few miles from my house. They all know each other, have known each other for years. So I have little confidence that a judge will be fair and impartial here. Should the district attorney's office have to answer questions about DNA evidence that every news article mentioned for 20 plus years that said was ripped from the ear of one of the killers, and now suddenly, as of last year, they say, we eliminated that. That's not relevant. But now they don't want to answer questions about how they eliminated that as being relevant to the case, about if they got DNA matches, about who the match was. Did they submit to CODIS? Did they get any familial matches? These are very important questions. And an agency of the government should have to answer them. I feel very, very strongly about this. So strongly, in fact, that if I have to file in common pleas court and take another loss, I'm going to do it solely for the victims and their families. I'm going to do it to let these people in the government know that they should be held accountable for everything in this case. And again, I think we have to be very fair to these police and this local district attorney, but they seem to have this elitist attitude that you don't have a right to know. You are a peasant and we are the ruling class. And even though we haven't solved this case, and you, Steve Campbell, may be very well in possession of resources, time, investigative skill, proven track record of good investigative skill, and access to retired police officers and detectives, and I may stress the word may, but I believe it's a definite possibility. That sounds weird. Definite possibility. I always hate it when people said that. It's a possibility that I may have access to a retired FBI profiler who will go through the case with me and help us develop a profile of who the likely killer or killers is likely to be. It will narrow the search pool for potential perpetrators. It would be very helpful. By the way, one of the other questions I asked that they won't answer is, have you reached out to the FBI? Have you asked them to develop a profile of the killer, which may help or aid in the investigation? No, we won't answer that question. And it is so frustrating that I'm sitting here, and I'm sure, especially if I had more information to give this retired FBI profiler, we could get a profile. We could develop a profile. And if that's something that they've never done and I can get it done, but they want to hold these records and not release them for whatever reason, it's sad. And I'm sad for the victims, and I'm sad for the victims' families. I'm a father myself. And I think about every day now, since I've taken this case on, I have thought about how horrific it is, or must be, for the victims' families to not know who did this to their children, to their sons, to not know who brutally murdered them. It is a tragedy to lose a child, but it's even more tragic when that child was taken from you through violence. I said that I thought I could perhaps make a difference here. I thought I could do something. I thought I could apply my skills, and I'm willing to dedicate a great deal of my time to doing this. Time is our most valuable resource, but I feel so strongly about this case. Something hit me when I went to see the location of the murder. And by the way, it's no longer a West Coast Video. As you all know, West Coast Video and Blockbuster and all video stores are gone. But I was able to see the building, and it has now been split into two separate stores, a framing store where you go and get a picture framed, and a Marine recruitment office. The framing store knew nothing about the case at all, and they'd only been there, I think, 6 or 7 years. I'm still reaching out to the Marine recruiter. Hopefully I don't end up in green fatigues anytime soon from my encounter with him. But no, I'm going there because I believe that the location of the actual murder is in what is now the Marine Recruiting Center. And I want to stand there, and I want to see it, and I want to see if they know anything. There are some people at that shopping center that have been there since the murder. I'm told specifically the cleaner. There's a cleaner there, you know, where you take your suits or dresses to be cleaned and pressed. I'm going to reach out to them and interview them, or try to. Like I said, I kind of struck out so far, but I have sort of made up my mind that I'm not going to stop. Many people, when faced with obstacles, they quit. Not me. I think it's important enough to the victims and their families that somebody advocate for them. When's the last time that somebody started asking these police and these district attorney's office people, what are you doing to solve this case? Let's get this case solved for the family. I don't think anybody's done that in a decade for these victims or their families. And I'm told, I haven't met or interviewed them in person, but I'm told that the victims' families are not even getting updates or caring to get updates from the authorities for many years now. And that's very, very sad. So we're going to take some comments and questions from the live chat. Want to welcome you all and remind you, if you're just joining us, you're watching Truth Seekers, and this is the start of our new investigative series, Getting Away with Murder. And this, of course, is about the tragic case of Seann Campbell and Bryan Benson, murdered in 1993, November 10th. Case still not solved. Also, we'll be taking comments and questions from the live chat. And I want to remind you of two things. First, if you're listening in audio podcast land, we love and appreciate you, but you're missing half the fun. So please do come on over to YouTube. Put Truth Seekers, one word, in the search bar. Look for me, the strange guy with sunglasses. Go to that Truth Seekers channel. Smash the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and you too will know when we're doing a live taping for the show. You can come here, ask questions, interact with me live as we're creating the show. You are most welcome. So go on over to YouTube, Truth Seekers, one word in the search bar. Look for the weirdo with sunglasses, smash the subscribe button, hit the bell, and come here to our next show. You are most welcome. Also, want to remind some of our new friends, we're now broadcasting live on DLive, live on Odyssey, live on Rumble. If you're watching or listening on Rumble, DLive, or Odyssey, we'd also like you to come over to YouTube. Put Truth Seekers, one word, in the search bar. YouTube channel is our main hub here. So go on over to YouTube, Truth Seekers, one word, in the search bar. Find our channel, smash the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. It really would help us, though we do love and appreciate all of you people listening on our alternative platforms. And the same can be said for Twitch. If you're listening on Twitch or watching on Twitch, go on over to YouTube, find our YouTube channel. By the way, in the description of all the videos, no matter which one you're watching, you'll see it says subscribe to our YouTube channel. And there's a link right there, so you don't even need to do a search. Just go to the description of the video you're watching, click on that link, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. It really, really does help us to rise in the search engines and do better and find more viewers like you. The other thing I would remind you is there's another way to help us, and that is to like, comment, subscribe, and share wherever you're viewing. If you're watching on Rumble or Odyssey or BitChute, Brighteon, Daily Motion, subscribe to our channels there. But one way that you can help us is to copy and paste the link of the show you're watching. Put it on your Facebook, put it on your Twitter, put it anywhere on social media you can. That helps us, again, rise in the search engine. It really does help us to find new viewers like you. The next thing that I would remind you, and final thing, is before we're going to take comments and questions from the live chat. The next thing I would remind you is that we're a viewer-supported show, and it's kind and generous viewers like you that keep us here doing this great work. Do you want to see me dedicate a great deal of time and energy trying to solve this case? I would love to do that. And viewers like you help, because all the expenses for the show, whatever we need, comes out of the till here. And kind and generous viewers like you support the show. We're a viewer-supported show, much like PBS. And here's Ian to let you know how you can support the show. As soon as we come back from this quick short break, we'll be taking viewer comments and questions. Please put them in all capital letters, and we'll have some discussion with the live chat.
Truth Seekers is a viewer-supported show. Wonderful people like you who enjoy this show send pledges in the form of super chats, super stickers, super thanks, PayPal, or Cash App. Instructions for how to help are in the description. You can also join our Patreon, and for as little as $1 a month you can get extra content. Patreon supporters get a backstage pass, early access to all our production videos before they are distributed publicly, Stephen Campion's music, private writings, a monthly show journal, and more. You can also become a YouTube channel member for $5 a month. A YouTube membership includes all of the Patreon benefits, plus a special members badge, priority reply to video comments, and the live chat, plus a monthly members-only video. We thank you all, kind and generous benefactors, for supporting Truth Seekers. Thank you for your generosity and support.
And we're back. So we'll be taking viewer comments and questions from the live chat. Welcome if you're just joining us for our new investigative series, Getting Away with Murder. And we have Reload here, who is a Truth Seekers member. Thank you for being a member, Reload. Says, hello, all Truth Seekers. Sorry I am late. We'll start watching from the start now. And thank you for being here, Reload. And that's what the replays are for. Aaron Flores, quoting back to me some song lyrics that I love from, is that The Dreaming or is that Stabbing Westward? In any case, I love it either way. Aaron Flores says, what do you want from me? Nothing is ever right. Nothing I do is ever good for you. I'm sick of trying. What do you want from me? I think that is The Dreaming, right? Patty Wilhelm is here and says, I'm in Florida in the Flim Flam state. I've seen it all here. It's the Wild, Wild West. Aaron Flores says, yes, The Dreaming. I believe that you are correct. So what do you guys think? Does anybody have any ideas? Maybe we can use the show here as a collective, a hive mind to figure out what we should do next. I am stuck in place filling out right to know requests for every single question that I have. But I'm going to start hitting the pavement because I think that would be very effective. It's a lot harder to say, you ever notice it's a lot harder to say no to somebody when they're right in your face, right? You ever notice that it's harder at least to just brush somebody off when they're standing right in front of your face. So I'm going to the Warminster Police Department and I'm going to start asking around there. Maybe they'll be a little more forthcoming. So far, most of my interactions have been with the district attorney's office. And I get it. They're a bunch of lawyers, right? Cops. You know, one of my father's best friends growing up was a cop. They're regular working guys. And I think I would get along better with them than some of the lawyer types. So we're going to move forward with our investigation, and I'm going to take you with me. I'm going to take all of you with me. When there's an update to the investigation that's worthy of dedicating a show to, we'll talk about it. I'm going to keep collecting and sharing every single thing that I can collect about this case. I believe that the case is or should be solvable. In fact, I believe every case is or should be solvable, right? Yeah, B. Baker says, this reminds me a lot of the local cover-up in the JonBenet Ramsey case. It's way easier to be corrupt in a small town. Well, I don't want to go so far as to say cover up, but it is troubling, right? It is troubling that they will not answer any questions. And why is it that they will answer questions to other members of the media up until now? And I'm told by several people locally that as soon as that information dropped that the earring was no longer relevant to the case, they clammed up, broad brush denial. We can't answer questions, ongoing investigation. By the way, the local police and the district attorney both confirmed for me that this is still an open and ongoing investigation. But don't bother to ask them who's investigating it. You're not allowed to know. Don't bother asking them, what are you doing to investigate the case? How much time are you spending? Or is a detective spending every week? I think these are important questions that public officials should have to answer. And I don't want to get adversarial with the local authorities. My chances of success or having some good impact on this case are much better if they're friendly towards me and my efforts and my ability to perhaps generate more leads or something, more evidence for them is much better if they're friendly. So I'm trying my very best. I can't lie. I threw a few digs at them. Like in one of the emails I didn't share, I said, you guys have to give me something here. This is how conspiracy theories start. And I believe that. You can't just refuse to answer any and all questions related to, and besides that, it's such an old case. What harm can come from talking about leads that were eliminated as possibilities in the case? What harm could really come from that? I don't understand how this is a problem. I just don't get it, right? But any more questions or comments for me, please put them in all capital letters. Aaron Flores says, we had a quadruple homicide on campus 3 weeks ago here at the University of Idaho, like 2 minutes from my house. They still haven't solved it. Yes, I'm following that case, or I just started following that case, Aaron. That's a pretty interesting case. I mean, somebody came in and killed 4 people at once. This case is just as terrible, though. Somebody came in and killed 2 people, right? Patty Wilhelm, Stephen, at a certain point, when you don't get help from the local level, go to the state attorney. Yeah, actually, Patty, that's on my list of things to do, because if the local district attorney, once I have exhausted all local options, then I can start filing right to know requests with the state district attorney, who is then going to have to, and then we start all over again. But does anybody else think it's kind of ridiculous that I should have to spin my wheels filing paperwork constantly just to get government officials to answer very simple, direct, basic questions about a many years old cold case? And I hate that term, cold case. It's not cold to the victims' families. It's still very real. It's still here. I would think that their anguish over the lack of justice brought to their family members doesn't get better over the time. It's just getting worse for them. B. Baker says, when you make requests about the DNA, I will also specify to see if there's been work to do familial match and genealogical databases. B. Baker, maybe you weren't paying attention. I read that. I did. I asked specifically in my right to know request if they had submitted to CODIS or any other DNA database. Did they get a familial match? Tony V says I'm a mean one. I don't think about that. Stephen, on the scene reports of the mall in adjoining neighborhood would be awesome. I'm going to do it. Yes. But that becomes a little awkward because it's such an old case, and here's some weird guy knocking on your door asking you if you remember the murder across the street. But it's worth trying. Like I said, I'm really going to hit the pavement and try to go out in person. and see what I can find out. Asman says it would just keep burning away with no closure. Yeah, I agree with you 100%, right? Amy Collins on the scene reports, do a drive past the old mall neighborhood. It's a mile from my house. I go there every week, Amy Collins. That's how I found out about this case. Somebody was talking about this case like around November 10th. And I heard them say, yeah, it's a shame they never solved that double murder. It happened right here in this shopping center. And I went, what? A double murder? And then I started finding out more about the case. Yeah. Okay. Asman says it would just keep burning away with no closure. It should be some pause for requests or people will do DDoS. Oh, I don't know about that. I agree. Patty M. Wilhelm says, stay on the broadcast media human interest story. I am definitely going to continue to follow up with this story. I'm not sure what else can be done, but I'm going to exhaust every possibility before, I don't give up easy. You guys know that. And once I've dug into a case, I keep digging and digging and digging, right? Amy Collins says, a mile away. Pardon me. Wow. Local true crime including Philly. I think it would be a hit. Yeah. And My Flock is Everywhere says, great show. Tony V holding down the Facebook live chat says, awesome show. I have so many questions for you. Don't know where to start. Keep it up. Well, thanks, Tony V. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. I know this isn't our usual wheelhouse, but this case is just something that has quickly become important to me. And we're going to be doing more updates about this. And I realize, however, we certainly take a hit in the numbers. I don't really care. I'm going to continue to investigate this case and report on it. Can't stay in one small subject matter. It'll drive you crazy. It will really drive you crazy. And this has been something different for me to investigate, right? Can you imagine, Stephen, if you made progress, how that would have such a massive psychological lift, like an anvil off their backs? Admirable. Well, it's a lot of pressure now. Now I'm starting to feel pressure to produce, right? But thank you for your kind words. Patty says, I'm a fighter too. Served me well in government. Interesting. Well, I, for one, am very glad. I was looking around for some liquid here. Not that one. Oh, now I got it. Okay, good. I'm good. I'm sorry, friends. I have a tickle in my throat. Let's hope it's just a tickle and not a sickle, Nothing to make you sick. So, what can I say, friends? We have done our due diligence. We have begun taking steps in investigating this case. I'm going to continue to take steps to investigate this case. And I hope that you will join me. This is going to be quite a journey. I've never investigated something so serious, and I feel a serious responsibility to do a good job doing it. And I intend to do my very best. So, friends, that's all we got for you for tonight. Tomorrow we'll be back at 9 p.m. Eastern Time with a very special interview for you, which I'm sure that you're going to enjoy, especially if you're conspiracy-minded. So, back to Conspiracy Land. Tomorrow night we go, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I want to thank all of you for joining us across the various platforms on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitch, on Twitter, on Rumble, on DLive, and on Odyssey, as well as all you audio podcast listeners. Thank you for taking this journey with us. We want to thank our chat room moderators. We want to thank Spooky for the excellent graphics as usual. And thank all you kind and generous benefactors, super chatters, PayPal donators, channel members, Patreon supporters. We love and appreciate all of you. And thank you for your kindness, generosity, and support. So that's all I got for you, friends. Actually, now that I think about it, it doesn't make sense to end with our usual outro. So now, oh, it's a live show, friends. Things go, sometimes do not quite go according to plan. That's something that'll work. So that's all we got for you, friends. Until next time, my name is Seann Campbell. Good night, and God bless all of you, especially you, Seann Campbell, and especially you, Bryan Benson, and all of your family members. God bless all of you. Good night.